Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Daily Roundup. Very happy today to be your host, Adam Sosa, and of course, very happy to be joined by my co-host, Tamara Ugolini. Tamara, have we had the opportunity to do this before? Like, I talk to you all the time, but have we done a live stream together? Is this an inaugural trip?
I think it's an inaugural trip. I was trying to recount myself, and I don't think we've ever co-hosted together. So, yeah,
Well,
welcome
that's
everybody to
exciting.
our Friday stream. And it'll be Adam and myself our first time co-hosting together. So that's great, Adam. I'm really excited. We have a bunch of topics to get through. But I guess you're going to take us through kind of the introductory once
Yeah,
over.
I'll go through some of the nuts and bolts stuff, and then we'll get into some stories, some breaking stories, actually. But first, yeah, let's get through this.
Mhm.
So first off, I guess if you are watching this, you're probably watching on YouTube, Odyssey, Getter, or Rumble. I'd encourage you, though, if you are watching on YouTube, become one of the majority of folks who've switched over to one of the other platforms that isn't censorious, doesn't control what people say within reason, of course, like Rumble. The other really nice thing with Rumble is that you can actually support the work we're doing, help us ensure that these live streams keep going, and you can do that by participating with Rumble Rants. The really fun thing is you can comment on the stories that we're sharing, and we'll engage with you sort of before the show ends. For sure, we'll get to those conversations. It's really nice to have feedback from our viewers, not just government authorities that dish out handouts to mainstream media. We get our feedback directly from the people that we are working for, and I love it. Another thing that I want to mention to you really quickly here is that we actually have a promotion, and if you hate censorship and love free speech, for a limited time only, Rebel News is offering an exclusive deal to our followers on Locals. The first 100 supporters to use the code Support Free Speech when purchasing an annual subscription on locals.com will receive an additional free month of our premium content. That's 2 months free. Your subscription includes access to our paywalled shows like the Ezra Levant Show, The Gun Show, and our featured documentaries, which are incredible. Don't delay. Click on the link, or in this case, type in the link in the description and subscribe to one of our premium content channels on locals.com with the code Support Free Speech. So you're getting all of that incredible access there. And again, that's another way you can help keep the lights on. Another thing that I want to mention today before we get into this news is an event that's coming up this weekend, and that is Rebel News Live. It's going to be absolutely incredible. Alberta's become like this hotbed. We had Dr. Peter McCullough. We had Ben Shapiro last night, who I did an exclusive interview with. That'll be out soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But then for me, the one that I'm probably most excited about is Rebel News Live this weekend. It's going to be incredible. Lots of the Rebel newscast is going to be there. You can see some of the faces there. Ezra, Dave, Sheila, Alexa, Drea. I'll be there. Given that we're visiting in my hometown, I'm so excited to have everybody. But beyond that, we have John Carpe, Chris Sims, Billboard Chris, Chad Williamson, virtual appearances and exclusive interviews with Avi Yemeni and Glenn Beck. That'll be remotely. Tamara Leach is going to be playing a concert, like playing music. It's going to be a truly incredible event. It takes up a good chunk of the day. I think breakfast and lunch are included. So it's incredible. So get your tickets right now. This event is tomorrow. So it's going to be incredible. I'm really hoping to see you there. RebelNewsLive.com is the place to find that. So there are the nuts and bolts. Right away, I want to get into a breaking news item here that is very concerning, and we'll comment on it after. But 1,000 students have been evacuated as a bomb threat is called into a Toronto Jewish school. Now, we do have confirmation the school is evacuated. There was a bomb threat. Details beyond that are a little bit slim, but we actually have, I believe, Lincoln Jay managed to already get on location and has some visuals from the location there. So let's jump to that video clip on Twitter, and then we can react to the sights and sounds that we're seeing there. So this is in the Tenenbaum Community Hebrew Academy, which is in Toronto.
What happened?
It's a
Can't talk on it too much. If you keep checking the news, CP24 and so forth, and just unless you're going to pick up a child from the school, we just can't let you go through at the moment. You're welcome to go around from the east end or the west end, but you just can't go through.
I heard there was a bomb threat. Is that true?
So, sir, I just can't have you going that way. Okay? Do you want to wait for me on this side?
Okay.
Like, is there a reason you want to go down there?
I'm just with the media. I'm just recording what's
So
happening.
if you're welcome to wait for me just over there, if I could ask you, just watch for that car. Just right now. We're still investigating it, okay?
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah,
You know,
the students have been evacuated to a nearby synagogue. And this isn't the first time either in recent weeks that this particular school has been targeted. So this is just completely, obviously, in my opinion, unacceptable and absolutely disgusting unfolding of events here in Canada that have, ricocheted over from the Palestinian conflict with Israel since the October 7th attack. And these innocent students, these minors, their parents must be just terrified. How do you even send your child to school and feel safe and confident in that decision if this is what's going to happen repeatedly? Like I mentioned, this is not the first time that this has happened. It's absolutely appalling. And we're seeing very, very weak responses from our elected officials in regards to these continued hate crimes and attacks that are happening on Canadian soil.
100%. And the thing that's really sort of jarring for me here is the response from the Liberal government. When there was a bit of spray paint on a mosque not that long ago, Trudeau basically flew out and took a knee and did a photo op and everything like that. It's absurd that the lack of sort of acknowledgement of what's happening here. And we're also talking about, as you mentioned, I think a couple people were arrested in relation to a prior bomb threat here, but there's also been a number of yeshiva Jewish schools that have been shot at, like literally bullets shot into these schools, and now a bomb threat here. This is absolutely horrifying. And the thing for me that really makes this so just repugnant is the fact that you'll see pro-Hamas protesters saying that, oh, well, this isn't about Jews. This is just about Israel. Well, this is a Jewish school in Canada, and no doubt there's probably some sort of familial or personal connections to Israel. And I mean, you might be able to make some assumptions about where their loyalties lie. But what is more innocent than like a children's school that happens to be Jewish and targeting that, calling in a bomb threat? The whole narrative that this is simply about standing up against Israel, it's not accurate. And there's so much stuff going around on social media. We've seen all the clips of people saying Hitler was right, terrible, terrible things like that. Like, what does that have to do with the current conflict right now? It doesn't. This is on a fundamental level anti-Semitism. And the other thing that really sort of, and I'd love to hear your sort of feedback on this, but the thing that I don't understand is so much of this started when people were rallied by that Hamas terrorist attack. So it's one thing to protest peacefully in an ongoing fashion, but to be rallied and encouraged after something horrific like that happens is terrible, in my opinion. It's unacceptable.
That's a really good point. And it further reinforces that this is not happening only to Jewish schools. It's horrific and should absolutely be vehemently opposed. But just now we have also a breaking scene at Scotiabank headquarters in Toronto. So similarly, in the city of Toronto, with multiple police on site and staff evacuated and this comes from a Twitter account, Rowan, formerly Twitter, now X. He says that Palestinian protesters occupy the premises and scream genocide accusations. And of course, he concludes that tweet or the post with, "Will Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, freeze their bank accounts?" ? Here, let's roll this clip. Shame on Scotiabank.
You have this. There's a situation, and don't get me wrong. There, like lots of communities, Christian communities, Jewish communities, most religious communities at some point or another have faced serious persecution. We've seen there's the Armenian genocide. There's instances of genocide that have taken place 100%. But a conflict with disagreements, the notion of using the language of genocide on every issue, whether it be in residential schools here in Canada or in this instance instance here, but particularly when we're talking about dealing with the Jewish community and the Holocaust, one of the most sort of noted genocides in recent, if not all of history, to try to adopt and appropriate that language inaccurately, it's just become a vehicle for the left. And I find it so interesting how many of these Palestinian protests, and pro-Hamas protests, I should say, are categorically using the exact same vehicles and tools of the left, the same language of the left. They're utilized by the same people. We were at a Ben Shapiro event last night, and there were counter-protesters. They showed up in very orchestrated fashion, left very quickly, and lots of the same sort of slogans were chanted. Obviously, they add some, there's a little bit more sort of genocidal undertones to some of these things, but it is wild to see the overlap in those seemingly incongruent groups employing the exact same strategies. There's definitely a sort of weird connect there. And ideologically, there's so many issues that they do not gel on at all. But it is, and Ben Shapiro talked about this last night, this idea of anyone who can make themselves oppressed or identify themselves oppressed or make themselves the other is justified in anything that they do. And has a right to stand together and beat up basically anyone they deem not to be oppressed, which when the majority are identifying as the oppressed minority and beating up the majority, the tides turn pretty quickly, and the so-called majority in power quickly becomes the oppressed. So a horrible situation. And honestly, folks out there, have your voices heard. Protest, preferably not with genocidal slogans. That would be great. I have had the opportunity to talk to some of these people whose family members live in the area, and it's very hard and emotional for them who live in Gaza. So I understand that. I'm not completely tone deaf to what is happening there. But you have to talk to the folks who are chanting genocidal slogans, who are shooting at schools, who are calling in bomb threats. And for example, I, as a Catholic, I know that there's a lot of problems with the Catholic Church. So I speak to that and criticize it and condemn those things that are bad. We need to see that from leadership within these communities to ensure that the entire group isn't represented by these extremists. But we don't see that breakdown right now. We don't see people decrying it.
No, not at all. And you have another clip that we just pulled today of Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, and again I've kind of referenced that a few minutes ago, but who froze the bank accounts of peaceful protesters whose government invoked wartime, unprecedented legislation to quash a peaceful demonstration in the nation's capital in January and February of 2022. And this is what she has to say now as we see this kind of rising radical extremism that is really kind of embraced by the left when you're othered, right? That seems to be their they capitalize on that politically when those people are othered, because it suits their narrative that they can say, well, equity and equality and all those fluffy socially justice terms. Marxist. And anyway, let's roll this clip of Freeland here, and we'll come back to provide some comment.
Both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, Pierre Poilievre, they've seen a number of instances this week where they've been chased out of venues, rallies disrupted, Benjamin Netanyahu making comments about what the Prime Minister had to say about the conflict in the Middle East at this point. The question they're asking is, what do you make of protesters targeting federal leaders? And do you think Ottawa's position on the conflict has been diversive as a result?
So, thank you for the question. The right to protest is essential to the democracy that we are all so lucky to live in Canada. It's important when protesters exercise that right that they are respectful of the work that everyone in Canada needs to do, whether it's the leader of the official opposition or the Prime Minister.
So, like, the amount of time she spends there getting to, well, the trucker convoy maybe caused slight inconveniences for federal members of parliament getting to work, so as long as protests aren't doing that, it's okay. Genocidal slogans, everything. Yeah,
They just shut
I
down
know.
that bridge, the main access in Montreal. I
I
think that was
know.
just yesterday.
But I think
The-
that's kind of what she's trying to get to, I think, right? Like, I think that's the point she's trying to make. She's like, how do I blame and excuse what we did to the trucker convoy while allowing all of this to take place? And there's no way to do it. It's not possible.
Mhm.
So you see her just doing that. I actually do think that that is a reasonably good question. Maybe not perfect, but it's nice to see them being put to the test in that regard. But we talked about this too with my interview with Ben Shapiro. We talked about it at length, the sort of glaring double standards that you see, whether it was BLM protests or whether it is some of these pro-Hamas protests. Some of what we're seeing, and there's been protests occurring for years through COVID-19 on parental rights issues. They're always complying with the cops, and there's no issues. They've never had to shut down roads. Just in Calgary, at one of the recent protests, they had to block down one of the entire major downtown roads. And sometimes they'll do that when the group's walking through, but they had to shut it down entirely because of rising tensions and conflicts. That hasn't happened at any of the prior protests over years. But suddenly now it's soft hands, and protesting is a critical right that must be defended, so on and so forth. Just a glaring double standard here, extremely problematic. I'm not sure when this is going to come to a head, what's going to happen here. Maybe with new leadership. I know Alberta has started to shift a bit to more towards the rule of law. Maybe with new federal leadership, the standards, the rule of law will be implied, and chanting things like genocidal slogans won't be tolerated as they should not be. But we can move on from that. We wanted to bring you that. Do stay tuned at rebelnews.com. I have a feeling any updates on this will be right at the top of the page with these bomb threats, with this this orchestrated, seemingly attempt to disrupt some of what's going on in Toronto.
Just before
anyways.
we do move on, Adam, we do have one more clip to play from Lincoln Jay, who again is on the
Coming in
scene there
live.
at the Jewish school that had the bomb threat. And we'll just play this quick little clip before we do move on. He says that the K-9 unit is on the scene, and we saw, I think, a little brief segment of it in the previous clip, but a helicopter is also on scene.
Sounds good.
So as you guys just saw, there's a ton of police on scene here. There's about a dozen police cars. They have a helicopter conducting surveillance above. That's because there was some sort of a bomb threat at a Jewish school here in Toronto, a large Jewish school. Yes, a bomb threat. So the school's been evacuated. Students were evacuated to a nearby synagogue. So I'm just here on scene now. We'll see if police do any sort of a press conference or any type of media interviews. In the meantime, guys, go to CanadaStandsWithIsrael.com. Go to that website, sign our petition. If you believe that this madness simply needs to stop, go to CanadaStandsWithIsrael.com and sign the petition.
That's a great clip from Lincoln. And I mean, again, just absolutely horrific. Why is there this need to involve children? As a parent, this is absolutely horrific. Leave in all aspects and areas of this woke social justice progressivism. Leave the kids alone. Just this should be a line that we don't cross.
And the glaring double standard of them complaining about things happening to children. Often that's one of the sort of the hallmarks of these rallies. They're saying, "Oh, this is happening to the children," and then calling bomb threats in and to get even and horrify children. There's just an absolute disconnect there. But yeah, it's completely unacceptable. Peaceful protest. Stand up for whatever it is you believe in, as long as you're not chanting genocidal slogans again. But there is an absolute line that's unacceptable by Canadian standards. It's certainly been crossed today. Moving into something a little less dramatic, but I mean something I think lots of people will be happy to hear. The federal court just overturned Ottawa's single-use plastic ban. Thank God the federal court overturned Canada's ban on single-use plastics on Thursday, determining the policy unreasonable and unconstitutional. The decision found that the classification of plastics in the cabinet order was too broad to be listed on the list of toxic substances in Schedule 1, and the government acted outside of its authority. There is no reasonable apprehension that all listed plastics manufactured are harmful. The decision has essentially quashed a cabinet order that listed plastics, manufactured items such as plastic bags, straws, and takeout containers as toxic under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. So this is obviously just categorical good news. Usually these plastics are byproducts of petroleum industries anyways, and they're used for incredibly good purposes. I, for one, though, am one of the people who am ardently in favor of plastic straws, and I'm sick of drinking things and having the straw fall apart. And I know there's people out there that are like, it's just a straw. What's the big deal? No, it's not just a straw. It's a symbol of what we're willing to concede to the other side. And it's utterly incoherent. Listen, not that long ago, we switched from paper bags to plastic because we were cutting down too many trees. And then now we're switching back. Whatever, no. But they're bags, they work. I prefer plastic, whatever. But straws, a cardboard straw does not work. It's categorically wrong. It's an affront against human decency. I'm being a little bit hyperbolic here, but only just barely. And the fact that we accepted that and people discounted it and went along with it, it's one of the symptoms of this sort of progressive madness. But stand up, fight for your straws, and I for one am glad to see that the court is doing the right thing on this. What do you think?
Yeah, well, it reminds me of the article, and I'm just trying to pull it up here. Well, I found one from CTV News Vancouver, but it found essentially that paper straws are even more toxic than plastic straws because they disintegrate, and you're essentially drinking. I mean, not essentially, you are drinking the straw by the end of your drink. I also vehemently oppose and hate. I will use the word. I hate paper straws. Whenever a takeout window tries to give me a paper straw, I say, oh yeah, thanks anyway. I actually keep plastic straws in a bag and also in my vehicle because that is how much I hate paper straws. But I think that this ruling comes a little too late. We see it's very rare to find plastic straws, plastic forks, what have you, in fast food restaurants these days. I think there are a select few, and primarily Burger King and Dairy Queen, which I believe are US owned. Those are the only places I could think of that still have plastic straws. But even the wooden forks it's a texture thing. When you try to eat off of a wooden, it's just gross. And I completely agree with your stance and your point there that we switched from paper to plastic to save the trees. And now I guess we don't have to save the trees anymore. It all just doesn't make sense. But of course, radical Minister Stephen Guilbeault is not going out without a fight. He had a statement posted on X, formerly Twitter, yesterday. He's the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada. We can't forget that. He says Canadians have been loud and clear that they want action to keep plastic out of our environment. I don't know that is factual. So maybe some more misinformation from the very government who wants to quell all misinformation and regulate the internet. But nonetheless, of course, as we saw with COVID-19, the science is clear. Plastic pollution is everywhere in our environment, harming wildlife and their habitats. There's also a growing body of evidence showing impacts on human health. We strongly believe in taking action to tackle this crisis and keep millions of garbage bags worth of trash off of our beaches, out of our waters, and away from nature. That's what we will keep fighting for. And the government is reviewing the federal court judgment and are strongly considering an appeal. I just see the taxpayer dollars. I just see them making it rain, taxpayer dollars here. We'll continue to work with provinces, territories, civil society, and industry to curb plastic waste and pollution. We'll have more to say on the next steps soon, of course.
Fighting for what matters, right? The real critical battles for Albertans. And and we touch on this on stream. It was particularly some of the extra healthy bio-type straws were deemed to be the most toxic. There's also a lot of questions about lots of these, whether it be the forks or the porous nature of them. But on a fundamental level, the mental health impact of drinking from a soggy straw is significant. I'm being a bit tongue-in-cheek there. But some of the fast food chains, and cheers to the king and queen of fast food for sticking to their guns, but other chains that I won't mention, they won't even put ice in their drinks because it'll contaminate the flavor, but then they'll have you drink it out of a soggy construction box. Like it's ridiculous. So hopefully this upholds, and hopefully the government doesn't deem that this is the thing they want to go for. I don't know anyone who's happy about these straws. It's ridiculous. And yeah, of course, Stephen Guilbeault upset about the court doing a good thing. He couldn't have anything nice. But yeah, it's hilarious. And I know even Rebecca Schultz and a number of other Albertan MPs or MLAs rather are weighing in and kind of taking some more shots about just the continued losses. They aren't just losing in the polls. They're losing on this. They're losing in the courts when it comes to blocking our journalists. It's just losses across the board for them.
And the comments on his post on X here are just, I mean, it's hilarious to read through them. You can see that Canadians, I don't know who he claims to represent there with his opening statement, that they've been loud and clear, but I think they're pretty loud and clear on X that they, for instance, Rowan says, take the loss and just go away. I mean, really, why do we need to dig our heels in now? Everyone hates paper straws. The judge has ordered it to be unconstitutional. Just please go away.
Move on.
Anyway, maybe we should take a quick ad break here, and then we'll come back to discuss some Alberta-centric topics.
Sure, sounds good.
Oh, hey, do you have your tickets to Rebel News Live yet? If you don't have them, then you don't want to wait. And if you don't know what Rebel Live is, let me tell you. It's our Rebel News one-day freedom conference, and it's coming up November 18th in Calgary. I'll be there with all of your rebellious favorites like David Menzies, Ezra Levant, and so many more. But there's also going to be an incredible lineup of amazing freedom-minded speakers to hear from, like trucker lawyer Chad Williamson, anti-child mutilation activist Billboard Chris, True North's Harrison Faulkner, former journalist Rodney Palmer. Rebel News' own Avi Yamini is going to join us in a virtual appearance, and we'll also hear from The Blaze's Glenn Beck in a special interview presentation. There are so many others, and we're adding more all the time. Just go to rebelnewslive.com to get your tickets and hang out with your favorite rebels, buy exclusive Rebel merch, and take in our Freedom Expo and live music. But act now, because tickets, as always, are going fast, and I don't want you to miss out. Go to rebelnewslive.com for tickets, times, and the full lineup of speakers. See you November 18th in Calgary. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn-Reid.
Come on out November 25th. It's all aboard the Freedom Train in Niagara-on-the-Lake. You can check Rebel News for updates and also the Freedom Passport site.
Tamara Leach, who led the Truckers Convoy, will be sharing the stage with some of the finest international recording artists, like the Chops Horns from New York City, who's played with Alicia Keys, Stevie Wonder, the Rolling Stones, and many more. Plus New World Sun, just off a European tour, and the legendary R&B master, Leroy Emanuel. Get on the Freedom Train with Tamara Leach. Saturday, November 25th at Niagara-on-the-Lake Central Community Center, 680 York Road. Get your tickets today at freedompassport.ca. The Freedom Train is coming. Know your rights. Know your freedoms.
Some great events coming up there. Are you going to be heading out to the Niagara-on-the-Lake event?
I'm hoping, but it may coincide with the Santa Claus parade. That is on my radar. So
gotcha.
it's a toss up there, but if so, then unfortunately I won't be making it. But that's the nature of this industry. You never really know until the very last minute.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll see.
Awesome.
So some exciting news out of Alberta and Danielle Smith's COVID kind of response criticisms. The Board of Health, Alberta Health Services, says 6 of the organization's top executives are no longer in their positions. It comes as AHS makes changes to its executive team during this restructuring. Last week, Premier Danielle Smith announced sweeping changes to dismantle the province-wide healthcare provider, reducing it to one of 4 new service delivery organizations reporting directly to Health Minister Adriana Lagrange. I think you're probably more familiar with this than I am. Adam, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, AHS, it was not working. It is not working. It's this massive bloated bureaucracy that spends more time, it would seem, on diversity and inclusion nonsense than it does on addressing healthcare concerns. Now, when Dr. Verna Yu was replaced and new leadership came in under the Danielle Smith UCP government, things seem to be trending towards the better, maybe a little bit, or at least there was some hope and new direction coming. But then we saw the news of the potential hiring, which was next, of Dina Hinshaw and a bunch of other sort of questionable content. So there seemed to be some ingrained underlying old guard within the AHS that wasn't turning over. Combine that with the fact that healthcare is not really improving. It's not getting that much better. It hasn't been for years. In fact, it's gotten worse probably. There's clearly a need for a shift. So they've done this whole thing, and we won't go into all the details. Frankly, I don't have them all memorized, but they're breaking it down to all these different departments that handle different things. I'm a fan of subsidiarity, which is sort of breaking it down to the smaller levels to manage it, not centralizing everything into bureaucracies. The one thing that I will say is a slight concern for me, though, is if you break down one bureaucracy to create 4 bureaucracies, I'm hoping that they don't just get caught in this trap of hiring the same people and having the same systems implemented yet again. And I know they're doing these drastic changes, and I know Adriana Lagrange has been working very hard to shift things over to something more productive, more direct, and trim that bureaucracy. But whenever I see that there was a recent press conference and they're just listing and detailing all the new departments and who will be in charge of what, and these people are being removed, I hope they do indeed cut some of the red tape and start tackling healthcare in practical ways. And those practical ways for me, and I know they've been working on this, but would be reducing wait times in hospitals, ensuring there are no more sort of red flag, red alerts for no ambulance availabilities, those sort of critical things, cutting surgery times down, all those sorts of things. I don't really care about announcements and board restructurings unless it's cutting people to save money. What I care about is the practical results and outcomes. Until I see that meaningfully, I don't really care. And on that note, we are actually seeing a little bit of that meaningfully. We can jump to this next tweet from Danielle Smith. More doctors for Albertans. And it's funny with the NDP saying that there's no doctors coming. The statistics seem to suggest that that might not be the case. That's our goal. And so far, we're on the right track with 14 of 18 regions in Alberta seeing an increase in registered physicians. 78% of health regions saw an increase in registered doctors. So that is good news. There's a doctor shortage. They said tackle it. They are endeavoring to bring people in. The thing that I would like to see here, and I'm really hoping that that Minister Lagrange will grant us an interview, is I know sometimes there's concerns about whether it be rural or specific regions. If the 4 regions that aren't seeing an increase are those problem zones, and what's being done to tackle that. But hopefully we're taking a step in the right direction, and hopefully there's some positive changes coming, and hopefully this restructuring isn't just a shuffling and a creation of new bureaucracy, but in fact a shift towards actionable items and change and actual constructive progress in healthcare.
Yeah, not just to kind of look like we're doing something, but everything actually just stays the same. I note in here that the transition will take place over the next 18 months, and will implement or see, hopefully, an implementation of new ideas, voices, and leadership. And it really makes me wish that we could see the same thing happen on the federal level, right? You saw the Public Health Agency of Canada and Health Canada completely fumble, fail, and otherwise show ineptitude in their job descriptions and their positions throughout the handling of the COVID pandemic. And you know, I call it a pandemic because I think the government's response was the pandemic. It wasn't necessarily a novel seasonal pathogen, but rather the way it was responded to that was truly the pandemic. And none of those people have faced any sort of reprimand for their ineptitude. Chief Medical Officer of Health, Theresa Tam, she still sits up there on her high horse, directing our country's public health response. And so I think that this further showcases and highlights the ability of Alberta to kind of be that North Star for the rest of the country in how to move forward and make amends and ensure that this kind of totalitarian public health regime does not happen again. I noticed just the other day that the Premier Smith released a COVID-19 report, and I'm just trying to an emergency review panel. They released report and recommendations for the Alberta government. And I mean, that is a transparent government who's releasing reports, who's doing the work, who's saying blatantly, this is what we did wrong, and this is what we will never do again. And meanwhile, at the Public Health Agency of Canada on the federal level, Theresa Tam's hiding behind internal audits and reports that detail and showcase and highlight the fumblings, the shortfallings, and the complete, as I mentioned, ineptitude of that government agency to be adequately prepared and respond to a pandemic. Instead, they prioritized knee-jerk hysterical reactions that were more adjacent to the dictatorship of China and under Xi Jinping than anything to do with previously well-established pandemic response plans. So I think that this is hopefully a good direction for Alberta to move in, and may also ideally pave the way for other provinces and territories, and then Canada as a whole, on how we can move forward and uphold and respect our democracy, because we saw that completely squashed and quashed throughout the handling of COVID-19. So maybe Alberta's looking better and better, and apparently it is for those doctors as well.
And, you know, the nail on the head there was the note about, like, sort of the media the government transparency. At the UCP AGM lately, the sentiment I heard from the ministers that I talked to, which, by the way, I think was every single minister in the province of Alberta. So they're available, willing to answer questions, tough questions, whatever it may be. They're not cowering behind that. But they talked about Alberta taking a leadership role, and they're doing that on addiction. They're doing that on the environment. They're doing that on economy. They're doing it right across the board. And the one thing that is encouraging for me, the federal Conservatives are not and will never be like the Alberta Conservatives, but what they do is they get in front of the parade, which Ralph Klein professed he did himself. But you see a lot of Scott Moe or Danielle Smith will do something, and then when it polls well or tests well, 3 days later, Pierre Poilievre will do it. So he's not taking on the leadership role on those marks, but he's following notes very closely. That may be the best we can hope for from a federal government, but I for one, certainly agree that it's critical for some of these places to start taking a stand. And then you even see places like Atlantic Canada, sometimes the territories joining in on firearms or other issues, following the lead, the coalition against this Trudeau government, and the 84% of Canadians who want new leadership, they're making their voices heard, and that's good. Another place that Alberta is taking an interesting pilot leadership role, we constantly hear, Sheila can attest to this, folks in rural areas, especially with farming becoming very technological, and the technology being quite impressive, in fact, access to reliable internet and high-speed internet is a critical issue. So I'm very interested to see Danielle Smith initiating a pilot project with Starlink in 3 rural communities to help connect homes to high-speed internet. This is the type of thing where if it works very well, you start to see other provinces doing it. And then this issue of access to high-speed internet in rural areas across the country is resolved after talking about it but not really doing anything for 20 years, or leaving it to the conventional major infrastructure gutting service fee charging providers, a private company, the same way that SpaceX has taken over space exploration. Starlink can fill that void. So incredibly interesting to see. Now, not to say it'll be a guaranteed success or anything, but kind of cool to see Alberta taking a leadership role in something like this as well.
Absolutely. Well, when we get into the COVID pandemic narrative, our next topic will touch on that a little bit more, but let's go to a quick ad break, and then we'll come back to chat about some of the ways that military veteran James Topp has been treated throughout his court proceedings recently.
Absolutely.
David Menzies for Rebel News here in downtown Toronto, and I got to tell you folks, next March 23rd to 30th to be precise, we are going on a Caribbean cruise. Can you imagine that? And a lot of your favorite Rebels will be there, such as Sheila Gunn Reid. We got Alexa Lavoie, the big boss man himself, of course, he'll be there. Ezra Levant. And how about this? How about this for the cherry on the sundae? Tamara Leach, Canada's #1 freedom fighter. She'll be on that boat too. And look at the itinerary. We're going to be going to Half Moon Cay in the Bahamas, and then we're going to jazz it up in Ocho Rios, Jamaica, and then there's Georgetown in the Cayman Islands, and finally Cozumel, Mexico. Can you imagine that? If you want more details in terms of getting aboard the ship, go to rebelnewscruise.com. That's rebelnewscruise.com. All the details are there, the departure dates, the costs, and you know what? This is not just a fun-filled getaway. This is a way in which Rebel News raises some revenue. Unlike the mainstream media, we don't receive a nickel of government funding, nor would we take it if ever offered. So it's win-win. Enjoy yourself in the Caribbean and Mexico, and also support your favorite online news channel. So that's rebelnewscruise.com. I hope to see you aboard.
Gotta go. How can you say
breaking?
No to Dave?
Yeah, you can't. He's truly one of a kind. Just breaking last night, or late yesterday, I should say, Canadian veteran James Topp was handed a severe reprimand and a $4,000 fine for condemning the military's vaccine mandate. The veteran pled guilty to multiple counts of misconduct Tuesday over his public opposition to medical coercion within the Canadian Armed Forces, the CAF. And I mean, what a principled guy to own that guilty plea like that. Yeah. So often you would see people try to maybe get out of the charges or not face such severe reprimand. But he owned it. He pled guilty to the allegations against him. And he did. I mean, he criticized the military's COVID vaccine mandate after over 400 members, the article states here, refused to get the jab. The former warrant officer made critical remarks about the mandate in 2 videos posted to TikTok and YouTube, which irked Judge Catherine Julie Deschenez at the time, the Vancouverite marched, you might remember last year, from the West Coast to Ottawa and became a revered symbol for Canadians opposed to medical coercion. The Epoch Times. Yeah, the Epoch Times journalist Noé Cartier, he was posting some updates on Twitter yesterday. You can see these came in at 6:46 p.m. Eastern. And then interestingly, the second tweet here on the page, he writes, Lieutenant Colonel Greg Chan, the commanding officer of the Royal Westminster, claimed in a statement entered during the court-martial that James Topp's action has hurt morale and recruitment at the unit. And then he admits in cross-examined to having zero evidence of Topp disparaging the unit, mentions evidence that numbers at the unit aren't good. And, you know, the inability of some of these individuals to self-reflect, you know, maybe the fact that the numbers at the unit aren't good is because of your mandate, not because somebody spoke out against the infringing aspects of your mandate.
You know, folks who are in the military, they are fiercely loyal. And to answer that call speaks to a certain level of character. We have a bunch of folks, our friends at Freedom Honey, Mike Mayer, veterans who have decried some of what has happened as well. It's heartbreaking to them to feel the need to do this because they are loyal and honest. I had the opportunity to interview James Topp as he was walking across Canada. We did an extensive sit down, and for him to say, I know that we're not supposed to do this, but I know that what they are doing is fundamentally wrong, is heroic. And you hit the nail on the head there with pointing out the fact that he's like, no, that is what I did because I knew I had to, because it was wrong. He said that right from the get-go as he was on that walk right across this country. And just an honest, down-to-earth, good guy. And I know, and sorry to interrupt, but the guy, when I mentioned he kept going, people in Atlantic Canada were like, oh, like, how come you're not coming the rest of the way? And he just kept going. Like, they called for him, and the man just kept walking because he felt there was a need. This is a man who, whether it's to serve his country or to decry the military doing something wrong, this is a man who answers the call. So hat off to him. Thanks for your service. And Wish it would have been nothing, but relative to dishonorable discharge and all that other stuff, not the end of the world, I suppose. But James Topp, heck of a guy, honor and a privilege. I do have an interview about on that page there where he discusses and sets a record straight prior to this ruling a couple months back. So do check that out as well. Let's jump into this
And you know what, Adam?
story.
It might be worth an update as well, just while we're talking about it, bringing James back on to chat about what's happened to him here as he pled guilty and what the next steps are, because maybe he plans to appeal. So I think an update is definitely warranted here, but
we were discussing last
story,
night, so it's in the works. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Just yesterday, we simultaneously saw the charges against a pizzeria in Alberta dropped. So vaccine passport charges against Calgary pizza owner were dropped. Without Papers pizza owner Jesse Johnson has had all charges against him dropped following his decision to serve customers regardless of their COVID-19 vaccine status. For anybody who might not be aware of what kind of the context that we're talking about, again, it's the vaccine mandates when the COVID-19 mRNA injections were enforced heavily on everyone indiscriminately. And I guess it was about 4 months there, the very effective coercion tactic utilized by various governments all across the country was to institute vaccine passports. So to partake in pretty much every segment of civil society, from dining into a restaurant to watching hockey games and going out to a movie theater, you had to show proof of vaccination, the double, as I like to call them, the 2 shots of the novel injections to enter these premises. And many businesses took a stand against this kind of medical apartheid. And owner Jesse Johnson from Without Papers Pizza was one of them. I mean, the irony here, and his lawyer, Chad Williamson, who was crowdfunded for him through your generous donations to the Democracy Fund. His lawyer in this interview here, and we won't have time to play it all, but you can go check it out for yourselves. He mentions in there the perverse irony involved with the fact that a pizzeria called Without Papers Pizza decided not to enforce people having to show their papers to frequent or enter his restaurant is not lost on him. And it obviously wasn't lost on the Crown either, because all the charges have been dropped. I guess he had been offered plea deals and other methods to, still kind of hint that he was guilty here. And he didn't take any of it. He fought this to the very last straw, and he won. I mean, but at the same point in time, he didn't really win, because he completely lost his business. He's been, he's been descended into financial ruin. He lost a business that he owned and operated for 20 years, all because the government enforced draconian and obviously now unlawful COVID-19 measures. And it further proves that the punishment is in the process, not necessarily in the outcome, because this may be a win, and it seemed like a win on the surface, but this man's lost his livelihood and his business. So I don't really take that as a big win. There needs to be some sort of reckoning here for what happened.
Well, the worst thing, and I was, Sydney Visitors has obviously been covering this story like nobody else, but like the first days this place was shut down, we were actually inside the restaurant. And it was funny, I remember we'd left a protest where the police were there, and then they went straight to Without Papers Pizza, and by the time we got there, we were on the roof of the building looking down at them, so we got some funny looks from them. But we were inside as this was happening, sort of witnessing all the madness and everything that was going on. And the worst thing for me was the fact that this guy was like a beloved member of the Inglewood community, a staple, and obviously you can tell by the fact he wouldn't take these plea deals, by the fact he stuck to his convictions, by the fact he's just so animated. He's such a great guy, but he was loved in that community. And then he's like, actually, the people that I've been serving for all these years, if they don't go and get this jab, I'm not going to exclude them from my restaurant. That entire progressive liberal community turned on him and vilified him and treated him like a pariah. That for me was one of the most, beyond the loss of the restaurant, beyond all that, the sort of shift in people in that area was heartbreaking. But being there, seeing they were bringing free food out to people. The dude was like, he's like, well, they're shutting me down. We got to go through all this stock. It's going to go to waste otherwise. They were just bringing stacks of pizza down the stairs, and everybody got. I ate as much pizza as I could possibly imagine. Even despite all that negativity, someone like Jesse Johnson turns it into a positive. He's still thriving. You can support his pizza place, I believe, of the same name in Invermere. He's got other places here in Calgary. So this is a guy who they're not going to knock down. And frankly, I know we've seen some of the pastors, and I won't be shocked if it happens here. This may be one of the big ones. If there is legal action because of charges that have been dropped, resulted in loss of business, loss of revenue, all this stuff, it'll be interesting to see what comes of that.
Yeah,
on
absolutely.
that note, unless you've got, yeah. Let's jump into some of this Trudeau stuff, though, because we're coming up against the hour, and we've got a few Trudeau stories to get into here, if that's all right. So Trudeau tweets, busy day at APEC, economic leaders meeting yesterday, working with leaders to make progress, oh God, on issues that matter to people back home and around the world. Like what? And we're continuing to do that work today. Yeah, let's look. Can we pull up this super awkward video? Have you seen the video with Trudeau next to Xi Jinping, and like everyone else is looking forward, and he looks like, I don't know. If we can pull that video up, let's just react to that quick because it's pretty wild. It's just so awkward.
He is such an awkward guy.
He really is. It's so bizarre. And the most normal. And the thing is, this in and of itself wouldn't be the end of the world, but there's the amount of videos where he's trying to like shake someone's hand and they intentionally look away, or just the compiled things. We talked about this a little bit last night too, but he's so emblematic of, under his leadership, what Canada has become on the global stage. Like, it's like a kid sitting at the grown-ups table. Like, they don't quite belong. They're there because they've kind of always been there. But the amount of damage, though, I mean, I think it'll be rapidly fixed. Everyone is very quickly, once we have new leadership and there's a little more coherence, going to start identifying Canada as what it once was, a leader, a peacekeeper, all these sorts of good things. But the damage done to the legacy of Canada by this guy is significant, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw that throughout, again, tying it back into the pandemic, the largest transfer of wealth happened throughout the first year of the pandemic, decimated small businesses. And that's really the backbone and the cornerstone of Canada's economy. And there is, how do you get that back? How do you get that entrepreneurship back, and people having the desire to even get back into that kind of business mindset, and to make it lucrative once again and prosperous for people? And also the amount of people that Canadians who have fled the country. Canadians are leaving in record numbers, and we are just bringing on more and more and more, increasing our immigration targets, and born Canadians are saying, we're done with it. We can't afford to live here. You've squashed innovation, and we can't compete anymore. And it just doesn't make sense to stay. I mean, the winters are brutal. A lot of Canadians are fed up. They're done. They're leaving in record numbers. And that immigration is replacing, and then some, all of the Canadians who are leaving. And it's a slap in the face to the Canadian taxpayer. We have this other article that came in yesterday afternoon as well, where the Trudeau family billed taxpayers $75,000 in vacation flights following their separation announcement. This comes a report after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his estranged wife, Sophie, officially separated. Their family enjoyed a round trip to Tofino in mid-August, costing taxpayers a whopping $74,178 to charter a Royal Canadian Air Force jet. And I mean, you don't need to get too much more into it than that. Yeah. But this fiscal irresponsibility from the Liberals, Canadians are now feeling it. They're feeling it where it hurts. It's hitting them in their pocketbooks, and they are getting fed up. The polling numbers are abysmal for the Liberals. The Conservatives are outpacing them almost by twice as much. And so, you can see that the proof is in the pudding there. And I don't know if Canada can hang on for another 2 years under Justin Trudeau and his horrible government.
And he doesn't care, like, at all. This is a guy, like any other leader in the history of this country would have resigned at one of the countless ethics violations and scandals that Justin Trudeau has been involved with. And the thing is, he gets in trouble for things, then he does them again. It's absolutely wild. It's absolutely unconscionable. I mean, this isn't just a bad leader. This is a bad person. And that's not a controversial thing to say. He couldn't care less. He's willing to take your money. Everything he says, he does the opposite of. And he's the biggest polluter. He's the most privileged. Every single talking point that the Liberal government has, that the Liberal Party has, he's the antithesis to it. In fact, him and most of his friends are. This Laurentian elite, they do whatever they want, and they do it without consequence. I remember Paul Martin downed over like an $80,000 scandal. This trip, as reported by BIV, cost $6,340 an hour. That's the rate they were basically paying for him to go on his little vacation. It's absolutely disjointed from reality. And the thing is, if you think those numbers are shocking, they aren't. They're nothing. They're insignificant, and they really don't mean anything compared to the massive laundering schemes, tax collection, carbon tax schemes, phony contract middlemen stuff, arrive scam nonsense you're seeing. The amount of money that is being pumped and I'd say flat out laundered by this government into various interest groups and into companies owned by friends of government officials dwarfs anything that he spends in these scandalous headlines. This is just a little sort of taste, a tidbit of what he can do in a weekend. Imagine what the government has done in years and years, and what they're going to continue to do over the next 2 years. Completely surreal. Now, I want to get your opinion on this.
You hit the nail on the head there.
Thanks. I want to get your opinion on this next story, because as someone who likes to work out and likes to go to the gym, I certainly have some strong opinions on this, but I think only a woman can kind of weigh in on this, and I mean only a woman, not someone professing to be a woman. We have the Stand with April update. The president of the Canadian Powerlifting Union resigns. Pressure mounts on the Canadian Powerlifting Union. It was revealed that the president of the sport's governing body resigned on November 12th following a failure to modernize its inclusivity policies. Now, this is pending from female powerlifter April Hutchinson, basically criticizing powerlifters. Now, you can read the story for yourself, but in essence, powerlifting is one of those instances where there's the greatest disparity between men and women. And I can almost lift the same amount as like the record-breaking women in the world. Not quite. There's some pretty significant ones out there. And then the men are miles beyond. It's probably the sport where there's the greatest disparity, or one of the sports where there's the greatest disparity between the athletes. So when you're talking about fairness in sports, this is probably one of the best sports to look at. What's your take on this, though, as a member of the fairer sex? This glaring double standard we've seen in sports across the board.
Yeah, it is a glaring double standard, and it's so perverse that this is continuing to be tolerated. As you mentioned, Adam, this is a sport where it really counts. You know, there was a pool player recently, I think, that backed out of a tournament because they were competing against a biological male, and it was a women's only thing. And I thought, you know, that's fair because that's principled. And I think that more women should be taking a stance against this. But in a game like pool, when it's mostly strategy and there's not very much athletic skill needed there in terms of muscle mass and bone density and those sorts of things. But in a sport like wrestling and lifting, there are clear advantages there to being male and having testosterone. And again, getting back to the bone density, muscle mass, this is absolutely perverse, and it is absurd, and it is a denial of science and scientific fact that there is some sort of equalness between these individuals of different biological sex. So 100% stand with April, and that's why we launched a campaign there. I think it's standwithapril.com. There's a petition going, and Sheila has kind of spearheaded that campaign. She'll be doing updates as they come in. But this absurdity and this insanity really needs to be reined in, and I think this is the way to do it, is simply by women saying, no, we're not going to tolerate your misogyny anymore. We're taking back our spaces. We're not going to let you infringe on them. And we want women's sports to be women-held jurisdictions. No monkey business here. And we'll see. I guess we'll see as this story unfolds.
Yeah, and I believe at that URL you can also chip in to help with the legal fees to challenge the ban. But we absolutely need folks like April Hutchinson, swimmer Riley Gaines, who also decried sort of the unfairness that's taking place in sports. And another thing that I would add, honestly, some of these folks, they have clothing brands, or they're sort of selling stuff because they've been often kicked out of their sports. Some of them, though, obviously April and Riley still fighting to participate in their sports. But do support them, because these people are taking a stand and risking a great deal, like other people, like Jesse Johnson of Without Papers Pizza, like so many other people have done over the past few years to push back. And what the left does is cancels. What the left does is destroys. So when people like this are willing to put themselves on the line, support them. I want to give a massive shout out to Sheila Gunn-Reid for the important work that she is doing on this story, standing with April Hutchinson. Listen, people know this isn't real. There's a select woke activist group that would do things like the Dylan Mulvaney paying $184,000. And then we see, obviously, the backlash. The majority of people not on board with this continued push towards sort of gender hysteria. So for those people who are taking a stand, kudos to you. Speaking of gender hysteria, I want to get to this last story for the day. And this is brutal. I don't even want to read this, but Winnipeg Hospital agrees to transition 10-year-old with consent of parents. The child, who goes by Mary, dreams of a world where her body reflects her identity. Of course, 10-year-olds talk like that. According to the Children's Hospital Foundation of Manitoba, they said she eagerly awaits the day she can take hormones to aid her transition. We don't need to read more. Check out the article for yourself if you're interested. But, the cognitive dissonance and the lack of care for an individual, this sort of soft, we're not really willing to tackle issues, so we're going to call tolerance for anything, even if it's damaging, good approach to healthcare is absolutely vile. It's un-Canadian. It is categorically wrong, particularly if you care about these individuals. The self-harm rate for folks, and I've talked about this before, but excuse me as I go off on it again, the self-harm rate for folks who transition is something nearing 50%. And that is atrocious. Now, people on the LGBTQ activism side would argue that that's because the societal forces are so strongly against them. I'm calling nonsense on that. You can become Woman of the Year just by transitioning from a man. There's every support and staple in place. You basically get an award for going down this road. Meanwhile, if you look at instances, say, like the Holocaust or slavery for African Americans, the suicide rates never peaked above 3 to 6%. The only people who harm themselves at rates comparable to nearly 50% are people with identity disorders. And that is what we're facing. And shame on this hospital for doing this to a child. Get them help, support them. If they're an adult and they want to make a decision, that's absolutely fine. No parent, no health institution, no government should allow this to happen to a child.
Absolutely. And I think we've come kind of full circle in the stream where, it's leave the kids alone. Why are we getting caught up and promoting this kind of identity crisis onto a child? Let them be whatever they want to be. Children are ripe with imagination and fantasy, and these kinds of ideas should be, not really reinforced or validated, as you see so heavily pushed by the medical industrial complex. And I would even go so far as to call it the trans industrial complex. One of the press releases here, I believe it came from the hospital, Children's Hospital Foundation of Manitoba, says that this Mary does worry that she won't be able to have a baby, but says her plans to be a famous actress won't allow time for her to be a mom anyway. This is a 10-year-old. Why? A 10-year-old is fantasizing about being a famous actress. If they want to dress up and wear a dress around the house and pretend that they're a famous actress, whatever, let them have it. But taking irreversible and health-harming drugs to reinforce a dysmorphia that is likely to correct itself into adolescence and adulthood is absolute medical malpractice, in my opinion. And what we're doing to children by reinforcing and validating these fantasies is absolutely perverse. And I mean, the data will come out, right? This is unprecedented. We have no idea what you can start to see it trickling in now, but we really have no idea what the long-term health effects and other societal effects will be on this generation who's being targeted so heavily by this sort of normalization of identity crisis. And it's really sad to see it unfolding, because at the end of the day, these are innocent children who rely on the parents and the adults in their lives to advocate for their best interest. And I do not believe this is in any child's best interest.
And in the same way, we saw now that there's some sort of legal reprimands for COVID-19, people seeking damages for what they endured with lots of these charges being dropped, a lot of them stemming from the Ingram decision. I suspect that with lots of these child transitions, once they're older, once they've gone to counseling, once they've sort of, and lots of these people do regret it and talk about the harm, talk about the lack of information that was provided to them. Once there's legal accountability, lawsuits against even their own parents or the hospitals that didn't sort of counsel them away from this as they should have when they're children, or in many cases, as I suspect, when you look at the number of parents who are involved, who are either trans or trans identifying or LGBTQ, whose children just coincidentally happen to also be trans, despite the probability of that being next to nothing. Once legal actions against those people come, that will be extremely interesting. And that might be when we actually start to see hospitals saying, oh, hold off a second. Well, we don't want to be held accountable for damaging this person for their entire life. So that is interesting. On that note, we do have 2 chats to get to really quickly. I'm going to read this first one here. Not sure I agree with it, but we'll read it anyways. It's from Enmark, who gives $5. Matt Petgrave, the Canadian hockey player who killed a white player. There's no information about his mom and dad. Is Matt half black? This could be a hate crime. What I'm reading about him, he's racist. I don't know. I don't even want to bring it into it. I do know that he has the most penalty minutes, has been ejected for abuse of officials, is known as an infamously dirty player. And I also know that he was brought in on suspicion of manslaughter. Now, in the UK, where he was brought in, that's very common practice if there's a suspicion. And sometimes no charge may come of that. So that could be just standard operating procedure. There's a bunch of dissenting opinion on what happened. I, for one, have seen the video, unfortunately, and it does look like there's a kicking motion. I absolutely am of the opinion that he should be charged with manslaughter, particularly considering that he has a very long history of dirty, dirty plays. So there's that. I don't know if you have anything to weigh in on that at all.
No, not really. I don't know that it necessarily is about race. I haven't looked into that at all, but I concur with everything else that you've said, Adam, because this is obviously someone with a shady history of dirty plays and needed a keener eye. I do also think, and I wonder how a neck guard would have prevented or maybe minimized what happened on the ice that day. I know that neck guards aren't required at that level of professional league. And maybe they should be.
They are now in that league.
They are.
They implemented
them. That's good. I didn't know that.
In that league. As soon as 2024 rolls around, they're giving players like a month to sort of adapt. It's being looked at the NHL as well. And I know that it's so legalized for the NHLPA that even getting masks on, like veteran players don't even have to wear visors if they're grandfathered in. So everything is very legal. But I mean, I don't know. This seems, I believe in the Montreal-Calgary game the other night, it wasn't a similar situation with like a kick, but someone spun and it nicked a visor or something. So I could see them potentially going down that route. And compared to a visor that can cause mobility issues and block visibility, the neck guard, I think there's versions of them that with certain polymers cannot be that restraining. Lots of players have started to adopt wrist and ankle guards for blade cuts too. So I think the league is trending in that way. I know many amateur organizations, minor organizations have already done that. In our final chat for the day, $5 from Snowy Roof, Dr. Makis, excuse the pronunciation, had named 6 people who were at the top of AHS. It's good to see Danielle has given them the boot because they were NDP people that Jason didn't remove. Indeed, again, hopefully these changes are in the right direction. And again, extend the opportunity one of the ministers I didn't talk to on camera, I saw her briefly on her way out, was Minister Lagrange. So it'd be great to have that conversation with her about some of the work they're doing, because something needs to change. The whole we're going to make healthcare better without changing anything hasn't worked. Hopefully this is a new direction that this government is taking, and hopefully there's some actual changes that take place. We did see with the Dynalife contract that they tried to see if they could cut some time on lab testing. It got out of hand and they terminated it. This isn't a government that locks in with their buddies and sticks with it even when it's not working. They seem willing to change things, so that's promising. Hopefully the results are there.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Adam. It's been a great stream. And thank you to everybody, super producers, Olivia and Efron, everybody behind the scenes who make sure that all the links are in the right spots. And you can find our daily stream. You can find us back here Monday from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern with another two Rebels to co-host with you. Actually, I think it'll be myself and maybe our beloved David Menzies. But I guess in the meantime, have a great weekend, everybody, and have fun, everybody who's headed out to Rebel Live tomorrow. And we will see you Monday morning. So stay safe and stay sane.
Enjoy this upcoming clip. SNL 8 years ago predicted the woke left. Check this out.
Oh, this is it. You need any help with your bag?
No, that's all right. I got it.
How about some walking around money?
Dad, it's okay.
Okay, just make sure to...
Call you when I get there? I know.
Yeah. You know, you could stay home, do another year of high school if you...
Very funny, Dad.
Well, I'll see you at Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I'll see you. Hey, Dad.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You got it, kiddo. Looks like your ride's here. You be careful, okay?
Dad, it's just ISIS.
Take care of her.